Hello everyone and welcome to Quality Games. Today we are making another tier list, this time that of Sassanid Empire's unit roster, and the tier list is made by the campaign setting, so not the multiplayer but the campaign. And let's start with Cavalry. First we have armored camel riders. They are, in my opinion, kind of wannabe cataphracts. Camels get a bonus when fighting against cavalry or horse cavalry, but they are slower and I don't like them. I don't make them. I only recruit them as mercenaries if I really need to. But compared to the ordinary camel riders, these at least can do something, so I think I will give these a weak B tier. But for these ordinary camel riders, I think they are absolute trash. You shouldn't make them. There is also limitations for recruiting them. The province from which you can recruit them need to have camel resource. So that limits them somewhat, but then again, that limit doesn't apply too much because you don't want to make them usually in any case. Or at least I don't want to make them in any case. Then we have cataphracts. These are kind of the armored juggernauts of the Sassanid Empire. So they are really well armored. They have decent charge. So that makes them really good units. And you will need to have tier 3 stables to make them. So that's kind of a drawback, but when you consider that the Sassanids have only tier 3 stables, which cost a bit less than 5,000 denarii, so the situation isn't that bad. Also, you are most likely to capture quite developed cities from Eastern Roman Empire, so you may have the training facilities ready for these guys. They are quite expensive, and at least for my playstyle, since Sassanids will struggle with public order, mostly because of cultural differences and because of religious differences, you need to be hasty. So the opportunities to get these guys, at least in my playstyle, are quite limited. And thus they get A tier. They might be S tier if they could be used more of them, but as it is, only A tier. Then we have Clipinary Immortals, basically General's Bodyguard unit, pure S tier. I think they have been mentioned to be one of the, if not the best unit in the entire game. So we have really heavy cavalry unit with 2 hit points, and it can shoot arrows. I guess they have some 30 arrows per rider in the unit, and their range is actually superior to normal archers or to normal cavalry archers. So the range value is 130, whereas normal archers have 120, and long-range missile archers have a range of 160. So these are decent enough missile cavalry. The only downside is that the number of the units or number of the men in a unit is limited about to 48, and you can also train these guys from tier 3 stables. So really S tier units. Then we have ordinary Clipinary. And these guys require only tier 2 stables, and basically most of the huge cities have these kind of stables ready, so you don't need to necessarily construct these. They also have bows and arrows, and 30 arrows per rider, so basically they are pretty much in the same category as these Clipinary Immortals. These guys don't fight as well as those Clipinary Immortals, but they are nonetheless very, very solid unit, especially in early game, since the requirements for them are so low. And because of that, I think they are S tier. And of course, you can see they are quite heavily armored. So you should expect to win almost any cavalry unit with these, except maybe Graal Knights or enemy generals bodyguards or something like that. But very, very good unit here. Then we have elephants. And basically, these guys suffer from the fact or limitations to recruitment. So you can recruit them only in provinces in which there are elephants as a resource, and to my knowledge there is only one of those. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You do control that province, so you should have at least one city from which to make these war elephants or elephants. But I think these lack the brutality of the armored war elephants or war elephants of the original Rome Total War. So the armor of these guys is quite weak compared to the, for example, to those cataphracts. But it's always funny to watch these guys to toss units into the air. But I think the usability of elephants in Barbarian Invasion is quite limited, because most of your enemies are going to have quite powerful missile units or missile cavalry units. Eastern Rome is going to have those Eastern archers and archers, not too many maybe, but still. And if you start to push towards the barbarian territory or the horde territory, you are going to run into quite a lot of missile cavalry. So I'm wondering between weak A or strong B, but let's give these A tier because they are elephants after all, and elephants are cool. Then we have nomad cavalry archers. So these guys are require tier 1 stables. So basically you can recruit them in almost any city with minimal investment. And these are your basic missile cavalry units. They don't do too well in melee, but they have a decent amount of missiles, and with them you can do decent damage and try to run the enemy units around the battlefield and so on. I found them quite useful in my campaign play. And because of the low cost and low requirements for recruitment, I think these guys deserve, at the very least, strong A tier. Maybe not as good as those Clibinary or Clibinary Immortals, because they can handle themselves in melee really well as well, but these are solid missile cavalry, which are useful, I think, throughout the game, practically. So, that was cavalry. Let's move to infantry, where the roster is quite small. And first we have Levy Spearmen or Levy Spear Militia, whatever they are. Basic infantry. You can recruit them from tier 1 barracks. You have an option to build up to tier 5 barracks, and these guys get more experience as the barracks progresses. I think there was even 3 chevrons of experience from tier 5 barracks, but I think that tier 2 barracks is quite enough if you are building these guys yourself, or rather the barracks yourself, instead of capturing them from cities. These are somewhat equivalent to Limitane. Their defense is a bit weaker, they don't have the missile attack, but their morale is better. So they are not too good of an infantry unit, but I think during most of the game they are the most solid thing of infantry you are going to get recruited. And I think for Sassanids, mercenary infantry is really important because the infantry selection here is quite limited. Then we have the good old, or should I say, quality old peasants. And since in the campaign you are going to struggle with the public order if the campaign drags longer than, say, 30 turns, maybe even before that you are going to start to struggle with the public order. So you need something to keep up the public order, and one of the things you can do is to have decent garrison, and the cheapest way to have the decent garrison is to have a lot of peasants. And even though the peasants don't increase the public order as much as those levy spear militias, I think these are overall cheaper option for that. And because of their ability to boost the public order, I think these deserve A tier. If the campaign would last long, I think these guys would earn their place in S tier. But since in my opinion Sassanid campaign requires haste and strong aggression all the time, you won't be having so great of a need of peasants. So that's because of that they get A tier. And of course you should never bring these guys into battle outside the city center. They will break easily. They are pretty much useless in battle, except in large numbers, frightening the enemy by the sheer amount of their numbers. But in crowd control in cities, decent enough unit. And of course, if your campaign drags longer, I think they would earn their place in S tier in that case. But in my playstyle, they only get A tier. Then we have, as the last infantry units, the Sugdian warriors. And the best thing going for these guys is their high morale. It's 11, whereas, for example, Comitatenses have only 6. And then again, these guys have armor-piercing attack, so they can be used to take out those heavily armored enemy units. The downside for these guys is that they require tier 4 barracks at least to get. So if you compare them to these levy militias, you need to have 2 tiers of barracks with which you practically do nothing, and only after that you can recruit these guys. Another downside for them is that you can only recruit these guys from certain settlements, and that's in the southeastern parts of the map. So basically your initial cities and 1 rebel settlement in addition. So you could get those high enough tier barracks by capturing larger Eastern Roman cities, but then in those cities you cannot recruit these guys. They are solid enough in battle, but I don't see any reason to invest that a total of maybe 7,000, 7,500 denarii in additional barracks to get these guys. So even though they are good or decent fighters, the difficulty of recruitment puts them in a very low tier. I'm almost tempted to put them into D tier, but I guess C tier is because of their decent enough fighting capabilities. Then we have missile units. First, nomad archers, and I think these are actually pretty solid archers. They have long-range missiles, so they outperform normal archers quite well. The Eastern Roman Eastern archers are better than these ones, but these are still quite good and solid unit to have around. The downside is that you need to have tier 2 archery range to recruit these guys, but that's not too bad for them. And I think these are at least B tier, and maybe your army composition affects a bit whether you want to recruit these or not. If you are having infantry in your army, that slows down the movement a bit. So you are having an army that's not fully composed of cavalry. Then I think these guys would be even A tier, but at least in my gameplay, I tended to use quite a lot of armies that are only cavalry, and they have the speed factor going for them. So because of that, in my opinion, these guys are only tier B. So their fighting capabilities would put them pretty much into A tier, but because they slow down cavalry units, that gives them B tier. Then we have Kurdish javelin men. They require only tier 1 archery range to get, or tier 1 archery building. They have limited amount of missiles, and after that their melee capabilities are not quite good, or good enough to warrant their usage. So I recruited these guys in some cases if I needed some defensive power from cities where I was unable to recruit, for example, those nomad archers. But I wouldn't say that these guys are any good in this Barbarian Invasion. Velites and Heavy Peltasts and those guys may have their place in the original Rome Total War, but now the units are so much more heavily armored, cavalry is more efficient in this Barbarian Invasion, so I think this drops even further the utility of these guys. So you can make them, but you have better options as well. Then we have mountain slingers, another missile unit option from tier 1 archery building. And well, they have quite a few missiles going, quite a few ammunition, so that's a thing going for them. But their range is only 80 compared to that of 120 of ordinary archer and 160 of those nomad archers. So the range is a problem for these guys. Their another and more severe problem is the low missile damage value they have. So they are pretty much unable to punch through heavy armor of enemies, so pretty much attacking comitatenses with these guys is waste of ammo. And the same could apply to Limitane as well. So only if you can flank properly with these guys, or even better attack from behind, you can do some damage. But otherwise I think they are pretty much waste of your unit slots in your army. If you have nothing else available, then maybe I would take rather the slingers than the javelin men. But mainly that's because I value the number of missiles more than the damage that these guys can do. But I think they are pretty much equal in footing. And then we have siege units. First is ballista. And if you have watched my unit roster tier list videos before, you know that I'm not a big fan of artillery. And the same goes here as well. And once again, if we are making aggressive gameplay with cavalry-only armies, then these guys will just slow us down. Of course, in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, there are settlements that are very close to each other. So in some cases, mercenary ballistas might be good. But to recruit these guys, you need to have tier 3 archery building, and there is practically no other benefits from that except these artillery units, onagers and these guys. So I can think of better ways to use that 4,800 denarii, for example, to build tier 3 stables or recruit units from those stables if you already have them. So, well, I'm just wondering whether to put these into low C or D tier. I think they are going to have to go to D tier. Then we have heavy onager. And for these guys, in order to recruit these guys, you need to have tier 4 archery building. So additional 9,600 denarii down the drain. And the same applies. These guys slow down your army. Of course, they are nice, but since you are going to have the most heavily armored cavalry unit, so I don't see why you would want to use these against enemies' heavily armored troops instead of your cavalry, which should be able to deal with them, especially if you can get a flank with them. So because of the high cost of the archery building, and it brings no additional benefits except to allow to recruit these guys, I will put these into D tier. In my opinion, in Sassanid campaign, these heavy onagers are absolute trash. You shouldn't go for the tier 4 archery building at all. And I wouldn't go even for the tier 3 archery building because there are so much better units than the onagers or ballistas you can have. But regarding the siege weapons, I think these guys are the most useful. They require only tier 3 archery building. They take 1 turn to build. They are somewhat cheaper than the heavy onagers, but practically they can do pretty much the same as the heavy onagers. So, for example, if you are assaulting an enemy in bridge battle, or you want to assault a city that's close by, then these onagers may have their use, but I recommend not to recruit them and not to build the buildings that you could utilize to recruit them. So let's make a quick check. I'm wondering a bit about these armored camel riders. Are they too high? Low B, strong C. Well, let's leave them here. So this is my opinion of the Sassanid roster put into tier lists. What do you think? Feel free to share your comments or your ideas in the comments field. Do you agree or disagree with my tier list? Thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. That will help a great deal. Have a great rest of the day. Quality Old Games out.